Hi, and welcome to this introduction to Relayer, the powerful multi-tap delay plugin from UVI. Relayer can be used to create classic delay and echo effects, with a wide range of different colours and flavours to choose from. Or can create more unusual rhythmic or chorusing effects, with up to 32 individual taps. The intuitive and ergonomic interface provides broad brush controls to manipulate all taps in one go, while also allowing you to dive in and edit settings for each tap individually. Let's start with a simple example on a vocal part. As I'm running Relayer as a send effect rather than an insert, the first thing I'll do is turn on the wet solo button to the right to disable the dry signal. The large knob at the top left of the interface allows you to set a delay time in milliseconds. So I could set this somewhere around 150 milliseconds to dial in a traditional slapback style effect. The feedback knob feeds the delay output back to the input. So if I turn this up, we get multiple decaying delay repeats, represented by faint green lines in the gain display below. Notice that changing the delay time will shift the pitch of the delay signal in the manner of a traditional tape delay. If I turn on the modulation section below, I can dial in modulation of the delay time to simulate the wow and flutter of tape. And I can enhance the impression of a tape delay further by enabling the colour section to the right and choosing one of the tape modes. If you wish, you can also turn on the master filters and dial back the high frequencies for a warmer sound. If I switch the centre section to the feedback tab, we find another pair of high and low pass filters. Unlike the master filters, these are in the feedback path of the delay. So if I remove some high frequencies here, the delay repeats will become progressively warmer as they decay. Let's also dial in some saturation with the drive knob. And sticking with the tape theme, let's switch the saturation to the tape style. If I click the preset menu at the top, I can save my settings as a user preset. And it will then appear in the user presets section of the same menu. Of course, Relayer can also sync to the host tempo, so that delay times are set as subdivisions of the project tempo instead of as absolute times in milliseconds. This time I'm running Relayer as an insert effect on a keys channel, so I'll leave the wet solo turned off and balance the dry and wet levels within the plug instead. If I turn up the feedback knob, we can hear the delay repeating regularly on the beat, and can see that the faint green feedback lines in the gain display all land on beat divisions. I'm going to turn feedback down, however, and instead turn up the repeats knob to add extra delay taps. The gain display now shows multiple bright green lines, while the central section shows a histogram-style display of vertical bars, allowing me to adjust the volume level of each individual delay tap. Over to the left, we have controls which affect the entire pattern. We can scale all taps up or down in level, or slide the pattern left or right, reverse it, skew it to the left or right, or scale it around the centre level. Alternatively, you can choose from various preset patterns, or simply randomise all the levels. If I switch to the time tab, I can adjust the delay times for each tap in a similar manner. And the spacing of the green lines in the gain display below will change accordingly. The bars snap to divisions of the global delay time by default, but you can switch the snapping off to the left, or change it to dotted or triplet divisions instead of straight. Let's set the first two taps longer, then shorten the final taps to create a flurry of repeats at the end. If I now turn up the feedback knob, we hear the entire pattern repeat and decay gradually, with faint green feedback lines on the graph to show where the repeats will fall. Let's switch to the feedback tab again, And notice that you can specify which tap is fed back to the input. By default this is set to last, but if I choose an earlier tap instead, I can create a different pattern of repeats. Tap 6 lands neatly at the half bar mark. So if I choose this tap for the feedback path, the pattern will repeat every 2 beats. Let's also wind up the feedback high-pass filter, so the repeats become progressively thinner as they decay. The pan tab, as you may already have guessed, allows you to adjust the panning for each delay tap. By default, taps are panned alternately hard left and right, but we need to first enable panning at the top before we hear the effect. And we now also see the pan position of each tap represented in the yellow pan display below. Again, we can manipulate settings for all steps in various different ways, or simply randomize them. While the spread control can be used to scale the panning globally from mono through to super wide. In addition, the width control can be used to add tiny extra delays for the quieter channel, to add an extra impression of space and depth. Of course, we also have a pair of effects tabs at the top, which each provide a choice of effects via the drop-down list at the bottom of the editor. I'll choose the comb filter, and once again enable the effect at the top so we can hear it. Setting the levels of the vertical bars now adjusts the comb filter frequency for each tap. And you can add feedback resonance for the comb filters using the knob below, and choose between positive or negative feedback. Our comb filter levels are indicated by the vertical heights of the orange lines in the FX1 display below. However, these levels don't have to be static. You can modulate the comb filter frequencies for all steps using the LFO depth and rate knobs to the left of the editor. And the orange lines will fluctuate in height accordingly. Let's finish this example by switching to the FX2 tab and turning it on. I'll leave it set to the default biquad filter effect, but switch the filter type to high pass and dial in an upward sweep for the final taps. Of course, many useful effects can be created with fewer taps. Here we see a setup with just 2 taps enabled, panned hard left and right to create a classic ping-pong delay, as we can see on the yellow pan display below. If I switch to the Gain tab, I can select the clever Match Feedback function to make the repeats all decay smoothly. Or I could use a handful of taps with a short delay time and dial in some modulation to create rich chorus effects. Here's an instance with 8 taps, beat synced to 16th notes, and fed from the snare channel. If I switch to the Time tab, I can turn up the swing parameter to adjust the timing of taps landing on even-numbered beat divisions, and add a swing or shuffle feel. Let's double the length of the first 2 taps to make the pattern more interesting, and spice up the sound a little with some redux, sample rate and bit reduction from FX1, and some wah-wah style filtering from FX2. Another snare example, this time with a short, fixed delay time, and all 32 taps. And I'll adjust the warp control in the Time tab to stretch the start and compress the end, or vice versa. If I add feedback, the whole pattern repeats, as by default we're feeding the last tap back to the input. But I can switch to the Feedback tab and choose an earlier tap, which will create a much denser pattern of earlier reflections. And if I also wind down the feedback low-pass filter a touch, and add a healthy dose of delay time modulation, I can start to create unusual grainy reverb type effects. Let's also turn on the colour section to the right and load one of the reverb impulses from the Rooms category. course, I can create infinite variations of this reverb by adjusting delay times individually for each tap instead of simply warping them. Or by repeatedly randomizing until you find something you like. If a sequence contains a pattern you would like to repeat, simply drag the range, start and end markers at the top, and the selected region will be looped for the rest of the pattern. If necessary, you can flatten the loop with the button to the right, and turn the looped pattern into a normal pattern for further editing. I'm going to finish off by turning on the gate section to the left. This mutes the input until you press the momentary gate button. So automating this control provides an easy way to fly in spot effects for specific drum hits. Or specific vocal phrases. That's all I've got time for in this video, though I've barely scratched the surface of the possibilities. Check out the detailed user manual if you need more information. Thanks for watching.